Okay.
2837. 2837.
And then
Zero.
zero.
And then WYZ.
Yeah.
Very good.
And it's C, eh?
Yeah.
Good morning.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Right, okay, let us please start talking about a melacha which we have actually touched quite a number of times, but never really done justice to it, and that is the melacha, the prohibition on Shabbos of boira, of separating. And this melacha is a very important melacha. It's one of the, I would say, richest melachas, in the sense that the rabbinic literature surrounding the melacha of boira is very intense. There's a lot written. It's a long siman in Shulchan Aruch. The section in Shulchan Aruch that deals with it is relatively lengthy, as opposed to other melachas. There's a lot of commentary. There's a lot of contemporary discussions in the melacha of boira, and it's a fascinating melacha.
Is it a general concept or is it only for food?
We'll try and cover all the basic ideas. He wants to help me to help.
Okay.
No, prompting. It's called. What they call it, prompting. Yeah, he needs some prompting. But in the Kal Chassidim, there's someone who, when someone speaks, who's not, because on Friday night someone speaks and it could be different people. So a certain member of the community who always says first loudly, "Good Shabbos," to prompt the person into to break the ice. Anyway, so thank you, my dear friend Bas. Right, so boira is an interesting melacha. Now, the primary reason, we will discuss other parts of boira, and there's lots to discuss, so we have to start somewhere and go on from there. But the primary reason why boira is interesting is because, unlike other melachas, boira has a specific way in which it can be done lechatchila, to begin with. And the question is, what is that way, and how? The questions are, what is that way, and how does that allow it to be done to begin with? What I mean to say is like this. Normally speaking, there are no exceptions to the rule of bishul, for example, of cooking. You can't cook. There are indeed certain ways in which one can heat something up that isn't considered cooking. So we spoke about before about cooking in theory in a klisheni, in the cup. Maybe that's not considered cooking, because cooking is something done with a heat source, with fire or whatever, etc. That's cooking. So it's not really true to say you can cook as long as you don't do it in heat, because that's just not called cooking. If I were to say in English, you're not allowed to cook on Shabbos, but of course, if it's cold, you're allowed to do it. Then that would be obviously silly, because being cold means it's not cooking. So normally we find that a melacha is a melacha, and you can't just do the melacha in an unusual way if it's still called the melacha. I'll give you another example. There's something we call in halacha a shinoi, making a deviation, doing something in an unusual manner. You can't, to begin with, do a melacha in an unusual manner, even though when you do a melacha in an unusual manner, it's relegated from being doiraisa, I mean a Torah melacha, to only forbidden midrabanon. It doesn't mean you could do it to begin with. So there may be circumstances where the halacha allows it to be done with a shinoi. So, for example, a person who's in need, if there's certain circumstances where non-life-threatening illness but non-life-threatening, then under certain circumstances, and we'll talk about that another time, but under certain circumstances, melachas can be done b'shinoi, in an unusual manner. It doesn't mean that it's okay. It just means that the halacha has been rescinded. The halacha has been there's an exemption in the halacha because of this case, because of the circumstances. But with boira, there is a way in which boira can be done to begin with. And that way is as follows. Boira, remind ourselves, is separating. Separating off, we'll talk more about what separating is, what kind of mixtures apply to separating, and so on and so forth, whether today or the next time we sit together. But boira is the idea of separating one thing from the other. What the halacha tells us to begin with, not in extenuating circumstances to begin with, is that if a person fulfills three conditions simultaneously, all together, three conditions, not any one of the three, but all three in combination, then it is permitted. And the question is, what are those three and why? And the three are basically like this. We'll go into more detail with each of the three. We will discuss in detail what the three means. But the three conditions that need to be applied are, number one, the person has to separate the good from the bad and not the bad from the good. So a person has a mixture of let's say good apples, a bunch of apples, and there's a load of stones in the basket of apples, which obviously isn't such a good example nowadays, but that would be when you gather things up in the field and the stones. The stones are bad, the apples are good. You have to take the good, in other words, the apples from the stones and not the stones from the apples. So that's condition number one. Condition number two, and as I said, we have to have all three conditions together in order for it to be permitted. Condition number two is that the person has to separate by hand and not using any kind of instrument that helps facilitate separation. So, for example, let's go back to an example, maybe a better example that I should have used before. The farmer in the field has ground up the wheat, he's ground all the various whatever, and now he wants to sieve the flour so that the stones or the dirt stay at the top and the fine flour goes through the sieve, right? So the action of using a sieve is using a utensil. It's an instrument that facilitates separation, and that's forbidden. So it has to be done by hand. In other words, you would take the apples from the stones by hand, not using an instrument. So now two conditions so far. Number one, good from bad and not bad from good. Number two, manually, in other words, by hand, without the use of an instrument. And condition number three is that the separation is done for immediate use and not for a later on use. So in other words, I'm going to make a salad, and I have all the various ingredients in a big basket, and I want to take the good ingredients from the not good ingredients. And again, we'll speak more in detail about what good and bad means. Does it need to be actually good and bad objectively, or is it even subjective good and bad? But still, I have the let's say good cucumbers and bad cucumbers, and so I want to separate it off, take the good cucumbers by hand to make a salad. I'm going to have to do it only before the meal that we're about to eat, for immediate use and not for later on. So I can't separate even the good from the bad with manually by hand, which are the first two conditions, if I'm going to do it for later. So if it's Friday night and I want to make a salad for Shabbos morning, that's no good. If it's Shabbos morning, I want to make a salad for sort of Shlishis, that's no good. If I'm doing separation, obviously.
You need it immediately.
Immediate use. Immediate use means generally the meal that we're about to consume. That's generally what immediate use means.
En als je een beetje overhoudt,
Nee, dat is wat anders.
bijvoorbeeld je neemt zorg dat je zeker weet dat je voor...
So
If you have too much, you know, it is far too much for this.
Good question. Wonderful. We'll discuss the detail of each one of these three things. Absolutely. Much.
Can I ask?
1 second. Whoever's on the screen. Yeah.
At the table, you cut bread and you cut it, or just before the
we'll talk about it.
Or before you go to shul that you.
Yeah, we'll discuss it. We will discuss it, Ezrat Hashem. We'll discuss in detail each three of those criteria. But now, as an introduction, I want to bring out a point. Hello, you want to ask something?
Yes, if you have a big amount of cucumbers, for example, and if you wouldn't separate it now, and you cannot use it immediately, but you have big amount of cucumbers, and if you wouldn't separate it, then the rest of the other cucumbers will be rotten, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
In other words, you separate off some cucumbers from the others so that it doesn't go rotten.
I mean, then you have to take bad cucumbers out of goods. That's the problem, because they can, if you have big amount of cucumbers and some of them are rotten, so actually you have to take off the rotten ones, because other one, maybe tomorrow, after tomorrow, all cucumbers will be not good anymore.
Right, but that's fine. But why can't you take the good ones from the bad
Ja, maar
ones?
normally je pakt de slechte eruit.
You're saying you can take the good from the bad, but you might need it only later, only tomorrow.
No, I say, for example, you have hundreds of cucumbers, hundreds, and
Right.
maybe only 5 or 10, you see that they are rotten. And if you don't take it, the bad ones from the good ones immediately, then tomorrow or after tomorrow, all other cucumbers will be contaminated as well.
So take all the good ones from the bad
Yeah,
ones.
but normally you take the bad ones.
Yeah, that's in the weekday you would do the easier option.
Yeah.
In the
Ah,
weekday you would take bad from good.
Okay. It's only for Shabbat. Okay, understand.
Jij doet de goede eruit?
990 haal ik eraf van de 1000.
Ja.
Normaal gesproken.
Okay. Anyway, so let's
You can do it during the week, but not on Shabbat. That's what you're saying.
no.
Door de week is geen probleem.
During the week you can sure do it, but but on Shabbos, if you had a situation where there was far more good than bad, you would still have to take all the good from the bad and not the bad from the
Okay.
good.
Okay, but other days is no problem. Okay, right?
Yes, other days is no problem. Indeed, absolutely right. But we'll talk more in detail, and no one should worry. We'll talk more in detail soon. For now, I just want to bring out an idea, the opening ideas of Boira. So you have 3 conditions that need to be fulfilled together in combination in order for Boira to be permitted. Again, we said 1 is that you take only good from bad and not bad from good. 2 is that you do it by hand, and 3 is that you do it for immediate use. And now the question is, how does that work to allow Boira? And what I mean to say is like this: each one of these things on their own is absolutely insufficient. In other words, you can't suggest that each one is a shinoi, is an unusual way. First of all, because a shinoi doesn't make something permitted. But secondly, and this is perhaps much more important, because every one of those things on their own would still be forbidden by Torah law. I'll give you an example. The halacha says that if a person were to separate the bad from the good, not the good from the bad from the good, but he would do it by hand, and he would do it for immediate use. In other words, he's fulfilled 2 of the 3 conditions. He's still performed an issa min ha-Torah. In ha-Torah, there's no shinoi, there's no deviant just by the fact that he's done it by hand or by the fact that he's done it for immediate use. That's not called a deviant. It's not called a shinoi. It doesn't make it any different. The halacha is he's done the malacha. He's transgressed the prohibition of boira. Equally, if a person would take good from bad and he'd do it by hand, so he's got the first 2 conditions, but he would do it for later on, he's also liable min ha-Torah for boira. He's over min ha-Torah for boira. So any of those conditions on their own aren't sufficient to make any difference, to make any dent whatsoever, any damage to the construct of boira. That means that none of these conditions are deviants. Because if they were a deviant, then you would expect that any one of these deviants would at least knock boira down from being forbidden min ha-Torah to midrabanan, because that's the usual rule. I'll give you an example. If, for example, we have a malach called toichan, crushing, and crushing is normally done with some kind of crushing instrument, an instrument that's designed for crushing, either a mill, a grinder, or in the old days they would have a pestle and a mortar, and they'd crush with the pestle and the mortar, or any such thing. What happens if I take the handle of a knife, and I bang peppercorns with the handle of a knife? The answer is, although it may be forbidden, it's only forbidden rabbinically because you've deviated from the normal way to do the malacha. And a deviant knocks the malacha down from being forbidden min ha-Torah to being forbidden midrabanan. So it's only forbidden midrabanan. It's still forbidden, but at least we know how a deviant, how a shinui works in the mechanisms, in the construction of Hilchos Shabbos. But with boira, none of those 3 factors can be sufficiently called a deviation. And we see that that's the case. We know that that's true because any of those 3 factors that were changed with the other 2 or even 1 still applicable would still be forbidden by Torah law. And that's explicit in halacha. So again, if I were to do bad from good, and I would do it by hand, I'll do good from bad, and I'll do it by hand. So I've got 2 conditions still applied, but I do it for later. I have still transgressed.
You can see it in the morning, but you need it in the afternoon.
Right, you need an afternoon. Then you've transgressed the Torah.
If you can't make a decision about bad and good, because you want meat, for example, and what is the bad, what is the good one? I have no idea.
So we'll get there. We'll get there. We're going to analyze each category. Each category to analyze.
For children, from what age do you really think it's applicable?
Right, we'll get there. We're going to have to analyze Boira. Like I said, Boira is a really rich malacha, and we could, especially with my tendency to go off the point, we could get lost completely before we've even started. We will get there. Each of these conditions will analyze as an independent entity. What does it mean? What's good from bad? What constitutes a separation? What constitutes a mixture? When is that? When is afterwards? When is now? What's a hand? What's called the hand? What about an instrument? We'll talk about it all. But for now, the point I'm trying to bring out is that we have to understand what therefore happens when we do all three conditions together. If any of those three conditions independently does nothing to solve the issue, then how can it be that all three together solve the issue? And the answer is, and this is a remarkable conclusion that Chazal have, that if all three conditions are applied, we are no longer doing what we call boira, which is an act of separation, but we're doing what we call eating. Eating. You hear what I'm saying? That means if I have a mixture and I take good from bad with intention to eat it immediately or an immediate meal, as we'll see, and I do it by hand, I am no longer doing the act, the melacha of boira, not because I've deviated, but because, going back to our example we brought before about cooking, cooking is with hot water. Cold water is not a deviation of cooking. It's not called cooking. It's not the melacha of cooking. Lifting this cup from the table is not a melacha of boira. It's not an act of separation because the cup and the table were never one in the first place. So I don't need to tell you that, by the way, boira, you're allowed to do this. It's not in the first place a melacha. It was never considered problematic in the first place. And so the mechanism of boira is that boira means separating, but eating is not separating. And when you eat, you are engaging in not a constructive act of fixing something, but you're just eating. So what do I mean by that? What we mean is that the true nature of boira is creating a better status in a mixture. In other words, if I have a mixture of apples and stones, then the mixture is a faulty, a undesirable mixture because the stones have an influence on the apples, not so much as our friend said before because of contamination, but because the apples are not usable when they are surrounded by stones. And so a mixture is not desirable. And the way to fix that is called separating. So the constructive melacha, the Meleches machsheves, the intelligent melacha that's forbidden, is an act of separation which rectifies, which fixes the problem. But in certain circumstances, I am not fixing the initial problem, I'm simply eating. So for example, if I have a plate full of cookies and I take one cookie from the others to eat that cookie, I'm not doing anything, I'm not fixing the remainder of the plate. I'm taking one that I want to eat and everything else is exactly as it was before. So whenever we do all three conditions together, and I know this is very technical and very abstract, but it's a very fundamental concept in boira, which makes boira so unique. It's beautiful. Whenever I do all three conditions together, what I'm now doing is I'm not separating with a deviation. I'm doing an act of eating. In other words, I take the good from the bad. I take the apple from the stones. I do it by hand, and I do it to eat immediately. That's called eating. That is eating. Imagine I have a big basket of fruit on the table, and it's full of all different kinds of fruits. Forget good or bad. It's full of apples and bananas and oranges and what have you not. And I take one to eat. Am I separating, or am I just selecting something to eat? The answer is, even in English, you wouldn't say, I'm sorting out the mixture. You wouldn't describe it as sorting the mixture or sort of selecting and sorting. Sorting means we have a mixture and you end up putting things in different places so that those things now can be used independently. That's sorting. Yeah, if a child plays with toys and you have lots of different toys all over the floor, sorting would mean to get something and put the Monopoly pieces back with the Monopoly pieces and the Lego back with the Lego and so on and so forth. That's sorting. The mixture that was on the middle of the floor is now fixed by the act of sorting, which is separation. But with regard to food, with regard to the three conditions, if you fulfill all three conditions, in essence, all you are actually doing is just taking something to eat. By definition, you're taking good from bad, which means you're taking the thing you want. So that's already the normal thing to do. When you eat, you take the one you want from the one you don't want. You're doing it manually, which is a normal way to eat, manually. And you're also doing it for immediate consumption, which is exactly how you eat. I wouldn't separate off a cookie from this plate for later on. It's unnecessary. It would be an act of separation if I do it for later. It would be a way in which I try to fix something so that later I don't need to exert myself and do any work. But if I take it now, I'm not fixing the mixture. I'm simply selecting what I want to eat and I'm eating it. And so the halacha makes a very creative distinction. Sorry to be so elaborate. The halacha makes a creative distinction and says, despite the fact, leaving aside the fact, ignoring the fact that each one of these three deviations doesn't help at all on its own, not in the slightest, because I could still do a creative act of separating if I take good from bad, but I do it with a sieve. If I take good from bad, so I've got that condition, but I don't do it by hand, I do it with a sieve. Well, a sieve isn't an eating instrument, a sieve is a separating instrument. So bang, you've done something wrong. Or if I were to take bad from good, and I do it manually, and I do it for now, but it's bad from good, then again, the fact that you've taken bad from good, you can't say that's called eating, because you've taken the thing you don't want from the thing you want. And so again, it's forbidden min Torah. And if you take good from bad by hand, but you do it for later, the same thing would apply. Why are you doing it for later? If it's for eating, do it for now. Do it when you want to eat. So in order to change the nature of the action from one that's connected to a melacha to something totally separate from a melacha, no different to removing a book off the shelf, which is obviously not a melacha. I'm not separating from a pile, just taking a book that I can see visibly on the shelf. In order for that to be true, all three conditions need to be applied simultaneously together. And when they are all applied together, what we've done is we've actually stopped doing anything to do with separating, and we've just ended up doing an action of eating, or an extension of the action of eating, because of course you're not putting it into your mouth that minute, but it's an extended principle of the action of eating. And that's why the three conditions together are good, but, and this is why it's so important to speak this out, but each condition on its own is useless. If you have one or two of the conditions without the third, it's useless. It's no good. You have to have all three conditions operating together to change the nature of the action from a melacha into something totally different, something that's just called eating and not called separating. That's a general introduction to where was that tangible, logical? Did I lose you? Did I?
No,
but
One second.
okay. Can't you say it's consuming instead of eating?
Whatever.
Because I want to learn. I'm Shabbos, I want to learn, and yesterday I did this, and I had to make a choice because there's always a choice involved in that good from bad.
Right.
So actually, a precondition is the choice. So and I said, I'm learning so many interesting things yesterday because I want to learn. Just now, I want to learn. So what should I learn? I can't choose between bad and good for what I'm learning because both are fantastic and I can't make a choice. I consume it because I take it by hand and I will learn immediately. What kind of situation is that? And nothing to do with eating, but I can't decide. And I want to learn because with eating, you want to eat because you don't put the food there and say, well, let's go. You have no problem at all.
The boira indeed extends to non-food items. We'll talk about
exactly,
that.
Yeah.
And absolutely the same rules apply with non-food items. The thing that you want from the thing that you don't want, etc., for immediate use. Of course, it does indeed. The only reason why I'm using the phraseology of eating is because that's classic boira. Okay. And from there we can sort of draw extensions and parallels. But the classic story of boira is the story of one who separates as opposed to one who eats or is engaged in normative eating.
There is a psychological concept, it's called Gestalt.
Which means?
Gestalt. That is, they say a Gestalt is more than the parts where it consists of.
Right, right.
So if you have 3 things together, 5 things together, the totality is more
Then the
each
3
thing
parts.
apart.
Very nice, beautiful.
So, and that's actually what I hear in this.
Yes,
lesson.
yeah. The
So
3 things
concept
together.
is much more, and
They're not 3 exceptions. They're just ways in which we can change the nature of the melacha entirely. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have a bowl of food in your room, but you don't want to eat, and you see some water on Shabbos,
You have a bowl of food, you don't want to eat.
but
Some of
also
them rotten.
you look like, oh, there's water, and I have to take it because if I
'Cause it
let
might make the others go rotten.
the whole bowl.
Right. The question is, can we do a melacha to avoid loss? Let's say to avoid loss. And it's not so straightforward. It depends on the level of the melacha. If it's min haTorah or midrabanon, it would depend on the amount of loss. Under normal circumstances, you can't just do a melacha to avoid loss. In other words, forget the case of boira, because we nowadays conceptually we think of melachas in terms of like lighting and electricity, and that's why. And boira seems like just all you're doing is just playing around with some food on the table. But imagine now to ask you that that you see something's going to get damaged unless you turn on the heating on Shabbos. Can you turn on the heating to avoid some damage in the house? Let's say there's wet and it's the damp is going to make mold. Can you turn on the heating and the answer is no, of course. You can't do it. So if it's called boira, then boira is as bad, so to speak, as turning on. It's very hard to conceptualize it because we're so used to thinking of Shabbos in terms of like electricity and fire and the really significant things that we don't really think. It's like someone once said to me, I was learning with someone quite a few years ago, who was becoming more religious and learning sort of very basic ideas of Shabbos. And this person found it incredibly remarkable that cutting toilet tissue down the line is kind of as bad, if not worse, than going on his mobile phone or driving his car. So, so you ask someone secular, what don't religious people do on Shabbos? What can't people do? What can't Jews do on Shabbos? They don't drive their car, whatever. And what about cutting a piece of toilet tissue down the line? They say, what could be wrong with that? Well, it's a melacha of mechatech, which is unfortunately, according to many opinions, this particular action is a melacha d'oraisa, is one of the 39 forbidden melachas. So there is a certain like distance, a disconnect, I would say, in some melachas, that how real the melacha is. If you separate bad from good and you do it wherever the conditions aren't applicable, then you've done a melacha d'oraisa.
Okay, but
and that's why boira is such a scary melacha that needs to be really understood. Why is it such a scary melacha? Because as opposed to cooking, as opposed to driving a car you're not going to do in an immediate rush, because it's so familiar and it's such a big, significant action, getting out of the car, that most of us who've been familiar with the laws of Shabbos for long enough in our adult life, we're used to it. But and cooking is to some degree the same thing. You just don't put your pot on the fire. People might not be aware of how cooking can be complex in terms of reheating food, etc., etc. So cooking still has a lot to learn, but at least no one's really getting their pot and sort of filling it up with carrots and chicken and whatever and putting it on the fire and cooking on Shabbos. We're past that stage. But you could have on your plate in front of you some food, and you could have salmon or a fish, and it's got bones. And according to, at least it is a big discussion, which we'll talk about, probably not today, but we will talk about Bli Neder. I hope we talk about it. By taking the bones, the spine away from the fish, according to many authorities, you may have transgressed a melacha min haTorah. The Sephardim amongst us will be grateful to know that the Sephardi authorities were more lenient with food on the plate that's about to be eaten. Not because of any disagreement with anything I just said. We've spoken before about the 3 conditions, and here you're taking bad from good. You're separating the bone from the fish and not the fish from the bone. Imagine you have like a nice, we Ashkenazim have, these silly gefilte fishes or whatever. Or if we have gefilte fish. Apparently, it's recorded in books in Sforim in the last century or two that the custom of gefilte fish originated. Why did it become common to have gefilte fish, this fish mash that's baked or cooked or boiled or whatever it is? And apparently, it originated because of the problems the serious challenges that present themselves when you eat fish with bones on Shabbos. And to avoid that, it was ground up beforehand. It was made into a nice fish log, and then you can eat it without any issues of boira. But I had the good fortune once to eat in the house of an Israeli, a Sephardi Israeli, delicious food, really delicious food. I must say they cook well. And everyone had for starters like a full fish, like I don't know, like a white fish, a forel, or I don't know what fish it was, whatever. And I'm not such a fish expert. A white fish, and I, silly, uneducated Ashkenazi, sort of opened up the thing and like, I don't know how to do this because it had literally the full spine. It was nicely baked, very nicely baked with the skin, beautifully presented with some sauce on or whatever. And it has the full spine still ever. And there's some intelligent way apparently to disconnect the spine from the meat, from the flesh. But I had no idea how to do it. And besides the fact that on Shabbos, as I just said, if you sort of nicely separate off the spine, which is the easiest way to do it, because if the fish is soft enough, if it's been cooked right, then you can literally just remove the entire spinal section with the ribs in one nice lever, at least if you're delicate enough with your hands. And that, of course, would be, according to the Mishnah Berurah, certainly forbidden min Torah to do such a thing, to remove the whole spine. So instead you have to sort of get the flesh from between or whatever. But everyone around the table knew how to do it well because they'd been doing it for so long. They were very good at it, very skilled, and I made a mess out of the whole thing. But my fish ended up in the plate looking worse than it could ever look. But basically, sorry, let me just turn this quieter. But basically, yeah, so as opposed to other malachas, this was the point where it's so visible, the malacha happens in such a dramatic way, driving your car, putting the pot on the fire, there's like a trumpet noise, and you're performing the malacha. In the case of boira, you could literally perform the malacha on your plate inadvertently, and you've done boira. So that's why boira really it's so essential to understand the mechanisms of boira. And like you say, in the case of loss, who said that would allow you to do malacha d'oraisa in the case of loss? And that's a very important point to consider.
You said you take an apple with your hand, but a fish I would take with my fork.
Very good.
And the
Wonderful.
other thing, you choose the book from the
Shelf.
and then you put it back. So Shabbos you can also do it. But what about Lego? If it's spread out.
Yeah, all good. I'm being very. I'm being infuriatingly
bring it back to the same place.
I'm being infuriatingly dodgy today. I'm dodging all the questions. I'm just saying very good, and we'll get there.
And one more thing,
Yeah.
Something I saw people when you have the halle, which the hoe heet het zo'n met een aaltje erop, with letters.
Yes.
So they cut off the owl
sticker,
with a little bit of bread, not that you not only separate the bed, but also something from the good take with.
Why do they take off the sticker?
You can eat it.
You can eat it. It's rice.
Yeah,
it's rice
no,
paper.
so the man who taught me, he
you
said,
cut
you cut the letters.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But
I'm not going to disagree with the person who taught you, because they're certainly coming from a halachically informed position.
Yeah.
But the only thing I will say is that the problems involved with the possible problems with removing the sticker are far greater than the possible problems of eating the sticker. In other words, both present themselves as problems. Eating the sticker, eating food that has writing on, it's a completely different malacha, but cutting through food that has writing on is a potential breach of the malacha of moichet, which is erasing, because a form of destroying writing, and erasing is one of the 39 malachas, right? But what happens if you have
an apple, a little part is rotten, then you cut away with a little bit of the good.
Right, indeed, that's right. That's correct.
So he thought if you cut it with a little of the bread, not only.
Well, let me ask you in the first place. The apple I mean, we could give a whole share on this, but the apple, that a bit is rotten. Is it a mixture? Do you consider the apple? Maybe that's a good starting point actually for the next part of the share now.
Yeah.
When you have an apple and a bit of it is rotten, is it a mixture of rotten apple and apple, or is it an apple that has parts that are rotten? Do we consider it as a mixture?
It's also when you call it rotten, it's a little bit soft.
But let's say it's rotten. No.
When
Let's say
black or when it's,
let's say it is. Let's go as full extreme. Let's say it's rotten. It's absolutely rotten. There's a whole part of it that's rotten. There's a part that's gone wormy. Now, most of us we live in we're thank God affluent enough that maybe spoilt enough that at least my family, maybe some of you are better people than this, but if part of the apple has gone wormy and the other part is fine, then maybe some of you would cut it and eat the other half. Why waste a good half of an apple? Well, unfortunately, maybe my generation are a bit more spoilt and affluent, or maybe it's our whole affluent society, but for most of us, the apple looks a bit rotten. We have another 20 of them.
I think the good part tastes to the rotten.
Oh yeah, you can take. Yeah, that could be if it's mold. If it's mold, it could be. And today you don't really have it. We're so lucky that we don't even get in our supermarkets apples with worms in and things like that. Really? But I don't. I don't have apples with worms.
Yeah.
Very rare. The last time I found a worm in an apple, you know what they say, my dear friend. What's worse than finding a worm in your apple? Finding half a worm in your apple.
Fresh.
But the apples, we definitely, there's no question about it that the apples that come to the supermarkets are higher grade and they've been sorted and whatever. And I mean, if you go to like a fruit market, but I know that I haven't found a worm in an apple for a long time. Maybe I've not been looking carefully enough. I hope not. But
it's because most apples do not have a worm.
Right, they don't know.
We had at a college Raf Beagle, and he went to the Shirin, and he told there was a time in France nobody's looking to a carrot with worms, but there was a time in France that there were very many worms.
Right. There was
so like in this time.
They looked for it.
Dat is wel met dadels en vijgen.
Yes, that's true. Absolutely. Yes.
Beter voorbeeld.
Yeah, that's true. But they're very small, and that's why it's harder to see and harder to whatever. Yeah, but that's a good example though, because when you have a date with a worm in, you don't throw out the whole worm. If it has, I wouldn't.
Okay.
If it has you take out if you see there's a little. If you see it looks infested, then it's hard to separate. So then you don't want to eat a worm.
And it is hard.
And it's hard to separate. Yeah.
You're already adding it.
Right, exactly. But let's get back to the apple. So if an apple, just using that as an example rather than practical, if an apple, part of the apple has a moldy section, whether we would or wouldn't eat the other half, is cutting off the moldy section from an apple called separating or not? In other words, question number one that we have to ask ourselves with regard to the rules of Boira, leave aside everything we've mentioned until now, the three conditions. Now back to Boira. So the basics of Boira. There has to be something called a separation. A separation means you had two things that are mixed, and then you separated one from the other. Good for bad, bad for good. That's a separation. But having many of the same thing, or even one entity, surely isn't called separating. So, for example, if I have an apple and part of it looks not good, and I cut down the middle. Well, let's make it even more broad. If I have an apple and it's all good, but I only want to eat half, and I cut it in half, I cut it these. Am I doing an act of separating? Am I doing an act of cutting in half? The answer is, and forget the words, the answer is you're cutting in half. Separating, which we said earlier, is changing the nature of a mixture from being not desirable to desirable. The mixture was bad. There was good things and bad things. There was a mixture of things. Some you wanted, some you didn't. And the ones that you don't want have a negative influence, not in terms of the mold, but just they affect the mixture, that they make it uneasy or less accessible to get the parts that you want. And so you separate one from the other. You have two piles. That's what separating is in essence, in principle. But if you have all of the same thing, let's have a look at this little jar here with things in. There are 6 of the same thing in the jar. They are all exactly the same. None of them are better and none of them are worse. I only want one right now, indeed. It doesn't make a difference which one I take. I'm not making an act of separation. I can even take one for later. I can one second. I can even take one. I can even take one for much later. No problem. Why? Because this isn't a mixture of two entities that need separating. It's all the same thing. So we now have a couple of rules that we have to establish. A mixture is A, two different things that are together. They could be stuck together. We'll get to the bones of the fish in a moment. They could be stuck, but it has to be in the first place two different things that at least are referred to or defined as two different things. So it could be apples and oranges. It could be cucumbers and pears. It could be whatever it is. It could be Lego and books, but it's two things that are mixed together. That's rule number one. If it is one entity, one physical entity that was created as one entity, then I'm not separating part from the other part. I'm cutting part from the other part. And that is not the melacha of separating. Equally, if it's a mixture of different things, but they're all the same thing, it's not two different things. I also haven't done boira because it's not a mixture. It's just lots of the same thing. That's not called a mixture. A mixture is only where there's lots of different things or two different things together. Now, going back to the fish, and I mentioned to you before that there are authorities who said that removing the spine from the fish might not be boira. And various reasons given, although admittedly, I said before, the Mishnah Berurah is strict on the matter, fine. But and so are many of the Ashkenazi poskim. The Ben Ish Chai was more lenient, and so was the Maria Bulafia. Maria Bulafia was one of the earlier. Maria Bulafia was a much earlier Achron or late Rishon, perhaps. I'm not sure which one it was. But there's various ideas suggested with the fish problem. Because the fish problem is an old problem. And one of them is, how do we look at the spine, the bones, and the fish? Do we look at it as two different things? Or do we look at it as something that in nature grew as one? Indeed it did. And therefore separating part from the other part is no different than separating two halves of an apple. And there is a logic to say that despite the fact that I would say verbally bone and fish, that the fact remains that bone and fish is one thing. They grew together as one, therefore they are considered one, therefore they aren't considered a mixture. Now, that doesn't mean to say that if I were to separate off, imagine I separate the bone from the fish, but then I mix them back together again, then there would be a mixture of bone and fish. Absolutely, it's called a mixture. Just because they once upon a time were together doesn't mean they can never be mixed as a mixture. The question is only in the first instance that this fish is whole, are we doing an act of separating of boiro when we take bone from fish? And so as we said, there were those who said, no, that's not an act of separation. It's no different to cutting an apple in half. If it grew as one entity, then it's like cutting an apple in half, and that's not called boiro. It doesn't have any relevance to the laws of boiro, which means that all the conditions we said before are irrelevant. That means you could separate it for later on. It means you could take bone from fish rather than fish from bone. Even though you're taking bad from good, it doesn't matter. If it's not involved, if it's not part of the discussion of boira, then we don't need to come on to the conditions. It's just not called separating. It goes back to what we called before, eating or just taking a book, it just taking something off the table. If it's not a mixture, then you're not separating. The other opinion said, no, the bones from the fish, despite the fact that it grew together, the bone is still called bone, and the fish is called fish. With an apple, it's all apple. It's apple. Just some of it might have gone a little bit bad, but it's apple. With a fish, it's true it grew together, but who cares? It presents itself as a mixture. I, a human being, am a mixture of fish is fish, but parts of the fish are edible and parts of them aren't. Just does that make it?
What does Ashkenaz do when, let's say, when you take a can of sardines?
Yeah.
You can eat the bones
right,
as well.
Right, very good. So then...
And I personally prefer...
Not to.
Not to.
Right, that's a very good question.
With the tin of tuna, it's the same.
Right. Very good question.
There are those who say, I mixed it, because for me it doesn't matter.
Right.
And there are those who say, I don't like that.
Yeah.
There are the harder parts. I don't like that.
Right. It's a very good. Let me extend the question then. What happens when you have a bowl? We mentioned this now a few times, of apples and oranges, and they're both edible, but I want apple and not orange. An orange is not objectively bad.
You throw away the whole stuff.
An orange is an orange. So now we have to redefine the next thing. So first, what we first tried to define is what's a mixture. A mixture is two different things together, according to most opinions. It's two different things together. There's a question of what happens if the two things grew together. That's one question, fish. But generally speaking, a mixture is two things together. That's what a mixture is. So the apple, which you cut in half, is not two things that were mixed together. It's one thing, and therefore it's not applicable to law Boira. The next thing that needs to be defined is coming on to your point, is what happens if they are two things, it's a mixture, but neither is objectively bad. So example is apples and oranges. What happens if I have a bowl of apples and oranges? I want apples and not oranges. So is this called, do I have to make sure to take the apples from the oranges? Or can I say, no, neither are good and neither are bad, so I can take the oranges from the apples? And the answer is, again, the Shulchan Aruch says, the Rishonim already said, that learning up the Gemaras of Boira, we see that Boira has nothing to do with objective good and bad, although normally it would, of course, be to do with objective good and bad. For example, it'd have all your grain mixed in with some stones. You need to separate the grains from the stones. That's an objective. The grain is objectively good, and the stones, well, bad and good are sort of moral words. So maybe in a philosophical sense, neither are good and neither are bad. The good didn't do what. Yeah, I mean, Plato would have in Plato's Republic, he would have been horrified to hear me say that stones are bad and the grain is good. If you need to build a house, then stones are good, and if you need to eat, then grain is good. So it's all about utility. But that's the philosophy to the side. But definitely in the case of the general objective or mostly objective way of looking at things, the grain is what you want, and the stones are an impediment. They are they get in the way. They're not desirable at all. You don't want them in the bread, and therefore they are universally agreed to be bad when mixed into grain. But in the case of apples and oranges, neither are objectively good or bad. It just depends what you want. And yet the halacha says Boira is extended further than just objectively good and bad. If you have two things mixed together, one you want and one you don't want, the halacha says you must take the one you want from the one you don't want, and not vice versa. Because the one you want is the thing, the desirable thing. Remind ourselves, going back to the earlier logic, the earlier principles that we said, the reason is very straightforward, because when you take the thing that you want from the thing you don't want, then what you're doing effectively is taking something to eat. It's an action of, as we said, eating, consuming, etc., etc. But when you take the thing you don't want, well, why would you take the thing you don't want were it not for some kind of further constructive purpose beyond the immediate use? That's why you take the thing you don't want. Normally, taking the thing you don't want is a way of removing it to facilitate that at a different stage, the good is better. So you can never take the bad from the good. You must always take you can't take the bad from the good. You must always take the good from the bad, even if it's subjectively good and bad, not objectively good.
If you have a bowl with several fruits, and you said, well, I like the banana now. And the next step said, no, it's still there. Now I like the banana and not that means there is no good and bad. You make choices every moment.
That's right.
And it doesn't matter.
At that moment, it's
So
about what you want
is
now.
Also that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question. So do you have to separate it before? If you don't want to go into this problem, can you separate it before? Say, okay, I don't want to go in Boire. I take the oranges there. I put the
before
there.
Shabbos.
No. You serve it on
But
Shabbos.
that would be the greatest act of separation possible.
No, you get the oranges there, and you say, well, these are the oranges. There are the other ones, and you put them on the table.
But what? But were they mixed? Were they mixed up?
No, they were not mixed.
Before Shabbos, they weren't mixed.
No, okay, on Shabbos they were also not mixed. Then, yeah, they were before just an orange pieces, whatever.
That's fine.
But they say, so why do you don't do it? Not.
I don't understand the question. Don't do what?
Don't make a bowl. That's what I mean. With all the things together.
Food salad.
Put it differently. The salad with orange there, the salad with like there. You don't have the problem.
Well, that's how you avoid Boira in that sense.
Exactly. Why don't you do it? Otherwise, you come
You can avoid cooking also by not cooking at all. So I give you.
No, because presumably, I'll tell you, I imagine, I assume, the simple reason is because when you store your fruit, probably because of lack of space, so you have a fruit basket and you put everything in when you come back from the shops, and then you want to whatever. So yeah, it's true, but
between the bananas and oranges, I like the fruit 1 day before it's rotten. It's more sweet.
right,
My wife likes the bananas when it's still green.
right.
So yeah, it's so if I choose it, this for you, this for me. It's also within the kind you can choose.
Absolutely, within the question is, when does something become two kinds? That's a very detailed question. So, for example, like you just said, in an apple, it was obvious to us that even though some of the apple might not be so good, but it's one apple.
Yeah.
But what happens if, like you say, you have a bundle of apples or a load of bananas, and some are better and some are worse?
Yeah.
So are they called just bananas? Do we look at it exactly like we said with this, which is all the same thing?
Yeah.
Or do we say, no, once something becomes, and there's a discussion there, and some opinions consider it to be boira midra bonon. In other words, only boira midra bonon to do it. In other words, it wouldn't be a doiraisa because technically they're all bananas in the bowl. But because some bananas are better and some bananas are worse, it could be boira midra bonon. But either way, you can always avoid boira by fulfilling the three conditions. So long as you take the one you want.
Yeah.
Now, if it's your wife, let's say, how does this work? Let's say, because you mentioned this, let's say you want to separate for your wife or for someone else. That's also fine. It doesn't need to be what you want. In other words, if someone says, can I have an orange and not an apple, and you take an orange by hand, that's absolutely fine. You can do the act for someone else like you do it for yourself. But the thing you want is clearly defined as the thing you want and not the thing you don't want. So whatever that's wanted, that's the good, so to speak, and whatever's not wanted is the bad. Make sure you take the thing that's wanted from the thing that's not wanted and not vice versa. So when you do it for your wife, if she likes the green one, so you take the green one for her.
Yeah. And then what is preparing before the meal? So just
we'll talk about it next time. I'm going to make a note.
May I ask? Okay, short question.
Talk about that category. We talk about the next time.
May I ask? Are you consider the pelling of the fruit, for example, bananas or oranges or apple? If is it separation? You take a banana and you peel it, and you peel it.
Yeah. That's a very good question.
So you actually you separate bad from good or good.
Wonderful question. You hear the question? Every time you peel fruit, you're separating bad from good. You're taking a peel. In fact, peeling fruit is a remarkable halacha that isn't found in chapter 319 of Orach Chaim, where the laws of boira are normally found. It's found in chapter 321 for some reason. And actually, the halacha basically, it's a Yerushalmi, it's not a Bavli. The Yerushalmi explicitly talks about peeling the peel of an onion or a whatever, and it says it's like a kind of in between kind of boira. On the one hand, it's boira. On the one hand, it's the only way to access the food. The natural way to access food is to remove the peel. On the other hand, it's not permitted to do it unless you do it immediately. So it's like an exceptional kind of boira because the only way to access the food is to remove the peel. You're allowed to remove the peel, but you have to remove the peel for immediate use and not for later. Even though it's sort of, it doesn't go completely away from the laws of boira. You are allowed to take the bad, so to speak, from the good, but you're not allowed to do it for later on. In other words, the other laws of boira still apply to the case of peel. But we'll talk more about it. We'll talk more about that at a later stage.
Thank you.
Because it will come back.
The pit.
Yeah, the pit's the same. The pit, there's a discussion of the pit. Yeah, is the pit the same as a peel or is the pit different to a peel? Can you take the pit out of the food?
Yeah.
Or can you only take a peel because the peel conceals the food? We'll talk about that, Bez Hashem. I'm going to have to make a note because there's a lot to talk about and we'll get there eventually.
Okay, good.
But in good health.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we'll take a while. There's no other way to do it. I
have 2 dates.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Or Rosh Chodesh Elul, that's 25 August, or 10 November. You can also go those days.
Rosh Chodesh Elul is the
25 of August or in November. It's also, if you like both days, it's also good. Then you have for the next.
Hilchos Elul, I thought Hilchos Elul is a Shabbos. I don't know why I thought that.
No, Rosh Chodesh Elul is no.
It's Monday.
It's Monday, Sunday and Monday.
Sunday, Monday, that's good news for the Jews. Well.
Ja, nou ja, kijk, zeker met komen wel.
Rosh Chodesh Elul. I would like to do it then, so we can continue with this. Otherwise, it'll be too long.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's say that.
And so we do also for the next one, the 10th November.
Actually, you know what? I'd Bella.
Just to then
No,
we
I
see
don't
it.
want to do the first day because it's the first day of the Zman, and then you guys will come, and I feel like it's not like they're already out of the room
Yeah.
when they come on the first day. What about like a week or two after? Can we do even a week after that? Or?
Then if you change, one moment. Who is the 1st December?
First of
September.
September.
One moment.
Mooi voorbeeld nog eens. Check.
I
Let me
ask him. I let him of he
Or the
can check.
Wednesday, the Wednesday. Of
Oh, the Wednesday. Oh, you want the Wednesday?
I don't
Is
mind.
3 September?
No, the 27th of
Oh,
August.
well, one moment. 27. No, who's there? Corey.
Ja, precies.
In die koker zit.
No,
So
Katz is
So
not
let
there.
me know about the
Katz
first
is
couple of weeks of September. If anything in the first couple of weeks.
I
Of
can.
September. Let me know. Yeah.